Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
What is unfair in this country is the fact that we label bills to fix things and fix a lot of the symptoms, but we don't fix the underlying problem. And we're going to spend several $100 million when this bill ultimately goes through, and much of it will be well applied. But the underlying problem will never be fixed. And the senator mentioned, we have 12 agencies. 12 agencies across this government responsible for food safety. What I would contend to my colleagues is the same amount of money we spend now, if we spend it wisely, would give us a much safer food supply. All through the course of this, I've had staff in every meeting raising the consistent objections that I've raised. At every meeting, one of my staffers has been there. It was ignored. And I'm not stopping this bill because it was ignored. I'm stopping the bill because I don't think we're fixing the true underlying problem. And let me give you an example. Here's what Dr. Hamburg said. This is on the egg rule. We believe that had these rules been in place at an earlier time, it would have very likely enabled us to identify the problems on this farm before the outbreak occurred. How long did it take them to develop the rule? 10 years. It started with President Clinton asking that this be addressed. Robert Reich went and inspected and said, it's unbelievable what's happened. And what happened is he initiated with the FDA the start. Somebody ought to ask the question and hold accountable FDA taking 10 years to get a rule so we have safe eggs in this country. We didn't ask that question. And so the next thing that comes up after we pass a bill like this is that we're going to see another problem because we're not fixing the core problem. Let me read to you the oversight hearings that the Senate has committed on food safety. I think I have them here. There was a full committee hearing in 10/22 of 09, Keeping American Families Safe, Reforming the Food System. There was a full committee hearing developing a comprehensive response to food safety in 12/4 of 07. And there was a Senate Appropriations Committee oversight hearing on Hallmark Westland meat recall, a special hearing. There wasn't one hearing that said, FDA, what are you doing? How are you doing it? Why are you doing it that way? There wasn't one hearing that said, USDA, why in the world can't you get your act together? We didn't do the structural oversight that is necessary to fix these problems. I'm not denying that this bill will have some positive effect, but it won't solve the problem. And so we will pass a bill, and then we'll still have contaminated food, but we will have answered the questions of late. We can't keep running government that way. And I appreciate sincerely Senator Durbin's efforts on this part. We come from vastly different backgrounds. I don't question his integrity, his desire, or his goodwill to try to solve a problem. And as he told me on the phone, is I can't be involved in everything, and so therefore I shouldn't participate in this. That's the implication. I'm not saying the senator said that, but the implication is you can't be involved, so therefore you can't know enough to be involved. Well, having run a $70 million a year business in the healthcare field, having managed hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of people, and being trained as a physician and practiced for 25 years, I know a heck of a lot about food safety. And what I do know is if you don't fix the underlying agencies that are responsible for food safety, it doesn't matter how many bills we fix. And in this bill is a prohibition Section 403, jurisdiction authorities. Nothing in this act or an amendment made by this act shall be construed to alter the jurisdiction between the Secretary of Agriculture and the Secretary of Health and Human Services under applicable statutes, regulations, or agreements regarding the products eligible for voluntary inspection under this agreement. So we actually are doing something wrong here. Not just right. We're telling them they can't shift stuff around to solve the problem. So not only do we not do the vigorous oversight that is required to actually fix the real problems, we put a roadblock, a silo back up and say, by the way, you can't do any of this together. I mean, that's in the bill. Now what's really happening? The FDA commissioner says, had we put this rule out, this probably wouldn't have happened on the egg recall, Salmonella enteritis. It wouldn't have happened. Where's the answer from the FDA? Where's the oversight hearing on the FDA on why it took them almost 11 years to get a rule out on egg safety? That's my core objection. It's not, I want us to solve the problems. The problems on foreign inspection, I don't have any problem with. Mandatory recall, I don't really have any problem with, although we've never had a food supplier in this country that has not recalled when asked to recall. So having a mandatory authority is a false claim because nobody's ever not recalled when they were, because it's in their best interest to recall. So my problems really are characterized by this slide. If you think about the egg recall, the USDA knew what was going on in the farms in Iowa, but said nothing to the FDA. The FDA didn't look to see, and Congress didn't really want to hear about it. So we have a bill before it that does a lot of good things, but it doesn't fix the real problem. And that's my basic complaint. We're treating the symptoms of a disease. And you've heard my analogy before, but I'm going to make it again. If you come in to see me as a practicing physician, and you've got fever and chills and cough and body aches and are short of breath, and I give you something to take care of your fever and chills, I give you something to suppress your cough, I actually make you feel better, but I don't diagnose that the fact that there's a pneumonia in your lung, you're going to get better for a little while, and you know what? Then you're going to get really sick. And if I finally, then you come back and I've treated your symptoms the first time, and then I treat your pneumonia, and I get you over the pneumonia, and then I don't follow up after that to see what the real cause of the pneumonia, which was a little tumor in your lung that caused blockage, which caused the pneumonia. If I continue to treat symptoms, all I do is delay the time at which we get to the final fix for your problem. And my analogy is I think that's what we're doing. I believe we've not been thorough enough. The intentions are great, but I don't believe we've been thorough enough. I understand foodborne illnesses. I've treated a lot of it. I've had a lot of it. When I was in Iraq for 30 days, I had it most of the time I was there. The other question, and it's raised, is we can't keep doing this. We can't afford to keep doing this. We have more than enough money at the USDA and the FDA to do everything you want to do in this bill. More than enough. And that's one of the things the American people are asking about. And we're going to make this point on a food safety bill. And I'm fine with the heat that I'll take from the groups and the press on it, because I think the underlying principle is more important. It is easy to pass a bill that looks like it does something, and even if it does something, if it adds to what we're going to spend, when we don't address what we're not spending wisely, we'll never get out of the jam we've put our kids in. And to Senator Durbin's point, yeah, it is an authorization bill. I sent you and Senator Harkin, and as well as every member of my caucus and every member of your caucus, a letter at the first of every Congress saying that I would absolutely object to any bill that increases authorizations in this Congress that is not offset with reduction in less important, less priority items. I offered to do that to the majority leader. I offered to give it to him 2.5 weeks ago. He hung up the phone on me, wouldn't even say goodbye. I said, I'll give you a list. How about the $500 million that the U.S. Department of Agriculture pays out to dead farmers in crop payments? To dead farmers that have been dead 6, 7, 8 years, still paying crop payments. We got plenty of money to pay for it. We don't want to do the hard work of getting rid of the things that we should. And what America's screaming for now, they want food safety, but they want security for their kids as well. And if we continue this bad habit of ignoring the actual idea that there is a limitation on how much we can spend, we'll never solve any of the critical problems, whether we have clean food or not. So I do honor my two colleagues that are in the chamber. You're men of great intent, honest intent, caring hearts, but I disagree on how we've gone about this. And this isn't the first time I've stood up and heard the wonderful eloquence of Senator Durbin. He's great at what he says and how he says it. He is a very bright man. He makes his case well. But there are important things in this country that we're ignoring, and this bill's an example of it. Why in the world won't we fix the real problem? Why won't we ask? You know, the one thing that should happen, it amazes me. There's not a hearing scheduled on why it took 10 years to have an egg safety standard. We have allowed this. We have allowed it. The other point I would like to make is, yes, the money has to get appropriated. I agree with that. But we're going to spend this money. Senator Durbin, we're going to spend it, aren't we? Well, do you have every intent to make sure that it's appropriated?
Can find the money.
So wait a minute now. If we can find the money. So the earlier statements is this will solve the problems, but yet we're not going to find the money? It should be 100% that we're going to find the money to do this. And
question?
I want to continue my point, if I will. You have been always courteous to me, and I intend to be courteous to you, but I'm going to continue here for a few minutes, and then I'll be happy to give you the chance to respond.
I was going to ask him a question.
I will allow that in a few minutes. If this bill is that important, and the majority whip says we'll fund it if we can find the money, rather than say we're going to fund this, this is a priority, and he has the power to make sure that gets done. Don't anybody kid you. If he wants this bill funded, it can get funded. So the point is it's either it's going to get funded and it's going to get spent, and the argument about authorizations is bogus, or there's going to be a real question on whether or not it's going to get funded. And if there's a real question about whether it's going to get funded, then the importance of the issue isn't near as great as we've explained it to be, which goes back to an argument we've had for the 6 years I've been here. And I understand you don't agree, but I'm just a hard-headed guy from Oklahoma who actually really believes that we ought to make hard choices. We ought to downsize the size of the government rather than grow it. And when we have an issue like food safety, what we ought to do is hold accountable the agencies. We ought to hold, let me say it again, we ought to hold accountable the agencies, because I'm not sure that we don't have enough rules now. What I think we have is not enough effectiveness of the agencies and the dollars that they spend. And with the exception of foreign inspections, which I fully support. I fully support anybody who wants to sell food in this country, they ought to pay for the inspections, and we ought to be able to certify that it's safe. I have no problem with that. So there's a lot of components of this bill that I agree with. But I refuse to agree to a unanimous consent till we start looking at the real problems underlying not just the FDA and USDA, the Pentagon, Health and Human Services, the Department of Justice. The waste in this government and our refusal to look at that waste and eliminate it so we can do good things is the reason, one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, one of the reasons that we find ourselves $13.4 trillion in debt. Ideally, how would you go about this? Because one of the complaints is Coburn, you stop things in their track. How would I have done it different? And so I think I owe you an explanation of that. First of all, the tomatoes were never contaminated. They were thought to be contaminated. It was the jalapenos. So our agencies identified falsely a food that wasn't contaminated. So the agency cost the $350 million for the tomato growers. That's a very important point. The incompetency of the agency cost $350 million, which is a very different story than my colleague from Illinois related to. It was jalapeno peppers. So how should we go about this? We should before we do one other thing on food safety, every one of those agencies ought to know we're looking over their back all the time. That's the first thing. And they have routine oversight hearings on the appropriate committees 3 to 4 times a year. The second thing we ought to do is we ought to say, GAO, we want to know everybody that has anything to do with the quality of food in this country as far as a federal agency. And we want to know their line responsibilities, we want to know their authorities, we want to know X, Y, and Z, and the effectiveness on it. Because the GAO's study of the Department of Agriculture, as well as the FDA, says they're incompetent at most of this stuff. Oh, I'll be happy to give you the quotes. They lack the competency to carry out their... Well, how else do you explain that the FDA cost the state of Florida $350 million, falsely claiming that tomatoes weren't any good? That's incompetence. There's no excuse for it. There was no hearing held to hold them accountable for that. It's ignored in this bill. So how would we go about it? We would find out everybody that has anything to do with food safety. Then we would do what Senator Durbin wants to do. We would eliminate the duplication. We would make one line authority. This agency is responsible for all the food safety in this country. That's a marvelous goal, Senator Durbin. This bill delays that happening. And he's on to the right thing. We need to get there. I agree. But you know, when you go to Piggly Wiggly or Homeland, as we have in Oklahoma, and you go to the freezer section and buy a pizza for your house for Friday night, when you're going to play dominoes in Oklahoma after high school football's over. If you buy a cheese pizza, that's the Department of Agriculture that's responsible for that. But if you buy a pepperoni pizza, it's the FDA. Or I may have them reversed. I do have them reversed. The FDA is responsible for cheese pizzas. How does that make sense? It's a symptom of the disease of Washington. First of all, it's stupid. Second of all, it's inefficient. Third of all, it guarantees you that the two agencies aren't going to be talking to each other. The Food and Drug Administration and the FDA have, I think, and the USDA, I think that my number's correct, I may be wrong on it, 187 agreements across how they work across the food. Except you know what happened? In the egg, nobody paid attention to the agreements. We got the rules there. The USDA didn't tell the FDA. And then finally, you have an egg producer that the state of Iowa has done tons of stuff to say this guy's quality's poor. Did the USDA do anything about it? Nope. Did the FDA do anything about it? Nope. So setting another group of rules, the USDA knew there was a problem. So we're not going to be, it didn't need any more inspections. They knew there was a problem. They didn't communicate it to the FDA as per their protocol. So what do we really have going on here? We have a mess. And as well-intentioned as this bill is, and as hard as the senators have worked in it on both sides of the aisle, it doesn't fix the cancer in the lung that caused the pneumonia, that caused the fever, cough, chills, and malaise of the patient. And until we start drilling down to get to the real problems, the real issues of food safety, we're going to spend a lot of money, we're going to create a whole lot of more regulations, we're going to have another 200-plus page bill, and what we ought to say is, time out, let's do some things. Let's have a one-page bill that can pass by UC today that says we're going to apply food safety inspection on foreign foods, period. Boom, done. We can do it. That takes care of the food. You know, our seafood, a good portion of our seafood is imported, it's farm-raised, it's imported. We could do that tomorrow. We could have sanctions and penalties and criminal penalties for federal bureaucrats that don't follow the rules of their own agencies. You see, everything was in place on the egg. We didn't execute. We didn't carry the ball down the field. Here's what we know about the Coster egg farms. They're a habitual violator. 8 known run-ins or citations from state and federal regulators. Designated by the state of Iowa as a habitual violator. Robert Reich called them the state of the farm simply atrocious. USDA inspections, which I have the copies of the inspections here, routinely noted unsafe, unsanitary conditions without communicating any of those concerns to the FDA. We had a failure to execute. It was seen, it was known. What we had in place didn't work, but this bill doesn't fix that. It does not fix that. You know, I've treated a lot of people with toxic E. coli in my life, and that's what causes kidney failure. Salmonella hardly ever does that. It's not a fun disease to have. And there's nothing in this bill that says we're going to prioritize pathogens. You see, E. coli, compared to all the rest of the pathogens, is much more important. Much more important in terms of hospitalization, death, morbidity, and mortality for patients. So any food safety bill ought to work on the most ravaging problem first, not treat them all the same. Yersinia pestis, Shigella, Salmonella, they cause an enteritis. That's true. And rarely you'll have long-term effects from those. But from toxic E. coli, it's a whole different actor. And we ought to prioritize what we do in food safety through the food safety problems that cause the major problems. We don't do that. I know I've disappointed my colleague from Illinois. I know he's worked hard on this bill. We have some very stark philosophical differences about how to make the government work better. I hope through the next few years to convince him more often than not of going a different direction. And I know Senator Harkin's heart is one of the softest and best in our body. If somebody has a problem, I don't care what it is, he's interested in it. And so for disappointing you, I sincerely apologize. For standing on my principles and what I believe, I don't. You know, I don't see a great future for our country if we don't start changing the way we do things. And whether it's really drilling down and looking at what the real problems are with the agencies and doing the appropriate oversight, and really taking priorities and getting rid of things that don't work and making things that do work better, I worry about my grandkids. And I worry about all our grandkids. And with them at $43,702 today per child, man, woman, and child in this country, we can't do it anymore. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'll be as compliant as I can be, living within my principles. But I'm just not going there. And for that, I apologize to you. I apologize for disappointing you. But I sincerely regret that we couldn't have solved some of these problems along the way. With that, I'd yield the floor, yield to the senator for a question if he wanted to do it.
Madam President,
the senator from Illinois.
I'm going to yield to the senator from Iowa in just a moment, but